Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are ready to start the meeting.
Thank you. Welcome everyone for the PNF meeting for the 9th of September 2020. Let me start with the apologies for absence.
We've had apologies from Councillor Adams, Councillor Alloy and Councillor Hawkins, and Councillors Perry, Bates and White are substituting for those three councillors respectively.
Thank you very much. Minutes of the previous meeting. I presume all of you have received the minutes and the notes for this meeting. Any comments, any observations? Very clearly not. Delighted to hear that. Only observation I have for the officers is actually there are some outstanding points which we carry forward on these minutes, whether we could actually create a work in progress.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Anyone proposing we accept these minutes? Thank you.
Happy to propose.
Tapper. Seconding. Thank you, Councillor Garrett. Minutes approved, and I will sign accordingly. Agenda item 3, declaration of interest. I don't see any hands, so I presume there is none. So no declarations of interest. Moving on. Item number 4, complaints and monitoring. This will be handled by Mrs. Robinson today.
Okay.
And over to you, Mrs. Robinson.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm just giving you, sorry, Catherine. Good evening, everybody. I'm just giving you an overview of the complaints report that you would have been circulated earlier. As you'll be aware, the stage 1 complaints, these go to the stay at service managers. These can usually be resolved by the service areas quite quickly. Sometimes it's clarification required and doesn't result in an actual complaint, but if it does and the customer isn't happy, it will go to the stage 2, which is the service head. If they're still unhappy, it goes to the chief exec, which is the stage 3, and if still unhappy, they go to ombudsman. So for the last period, we've actually had 17 stage 2 and 3 complaints, which is a significant reduction on the previous year, which was 37 stage 2 and 3 complaints, a huge improvement. So compared with the previous year, there could be a few factors. Firstly, parking. The controlled parking zones were transferred over to Woking, and for this period, we didn't have any parking complaints. For the previous one, we actually had 5. But I spoke to Woking to see whether or not our loss was their gain, if you like. And they actually had seen a decrease as well. So for the previous year, they saw 7 complaints, and for this year, they saw 4. So it's going down for parking, which is good. Environmental health and JWS. Amy was introduced back in February 2018, and of course we had settling in troubles. So for that period of time, we saw 7 complaints. For this year, we've only had 1. So an improvement there. Finance had fewer complaints. They had 4 previously and 1 for this period. Likewise, regulatory. They have been working really hard on resolving their stage 1 complaints a lot quicker. So they had 9 complaints less than they did the previous year. Also, some of the complaints seem to be going to the service areas and bypassing the complaints and maybe come to us slightly later. So we will pick them up at maybe a stage 2 or 3, but they seem to be few and far between. So that's a plus. Of the 17 complaints, only 5 held elements of where we could have done better. Similarly, the ombudsman complaints were down to keeping customers better informed. So it's been quite a positive report. Service areas have worked really hard and improved. We seem to be doing very well, doing better, and in keeping with councils of similar sizes. And the exec heads are informed and lessons learned identified, and will continue to build on achieving better results. So it's a very positive report.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Robinson. Any questions? Excellent. No questions.
Councillor Garrett does have his hand
okay.
raised.
Sorry, Councillor Garrett, I didn't see your hand. My apologies.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, the figures look good. My concern is that some of the information has, as you say, been farmed out to other companies. And for instance, I had a resident contact me only last week, reference an issue they had with Amy, and they complained to the council, and the council said you have to go to Amy, and Amy have taken the complaint, but I don't know whether that complaint comes back to the council. So although the figures look lower, my question is, are we able to get the figures on the complaints that the outside sources? I know you're saying parking has had less, which is brilliant, but then I'm guessing in recent times there hasn't been a lot of parking, I don't know. So the question is there a way of getting the complaints that have gone to people like Amy back to us so we can see if the figures are actually really lower, or actually they're just hidden because we're not getting the figures? Thank you.
So, yeah.
Just particularly because waste is obviously an area from my my substantive job rather than the one I'm temporarily looking after at the moment. As far as I think what Gina was saying earlier is that a lot of the stage 1 complaints are very often service requests. So very often somebody may have their bin not collected, or there may be an issue with that. That would, as far as the waste reports, that would go to the Amy Contact Centre. And there is a contract partnering board. In fact, we've got one tomorrow. And at that contract partnering board, we get details of all the missed complaints, all the missed bins, and the repeat missed bins. That goes to the Joint Waste Services Committee, which Councillor Mansfield is the chairman of. But that can be circulated to all the members. The stage 2 and 3 complaints is where it's gone along to the Amy Contact Centre, and the customer hasn't had a satisfactory response to that. And that's how we would then get involved with that. And I think it's the same with the other areas as well, but hopefully that helps, Councillor Garrett, Chairman.
Any more questions?
Councillor Bates had his hand up.
Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Chairman. It's actually a similar type of question to the last one, in that there's 2 points I want to make. Firstly, regarding the process, and it strikes me that some residents don't necessarily get to the right route when they want to make a complaint. And if I give one example, today I received a complaint, as did Councillor Garrett, in relation to a matter in our area where the resident had decided to send it to a variety of politicians of all manner of backgrounds. But as far as I could tell, had not actually made that complaint through the correct process. So to the best of my knowledge, the correct officers had not actually been made aware of it. But they were clearly very unhappy from the nature of the email that I received, as did Councillor Garrett. So I suppose the question is, to what degree, I know it's on our website, but to what other degree do we make people aware about the complaints process? And secondly, in terms of the 17 that we do have recorded, I note that 11 were not justified and 4 were part justified. And I just want to be reassured, I suppose, that even in the event of something being not justified or only part justified, that we don't just assume, oh, there's nothing for us there, that actually there may be still lessons to learn in terms of, for example, how we have kept the person informed generally, or in terms of why the person thought that policy or procedure was in place in the first place. Why did the person have that misunderstanding? So we shouldn't just assume because something is not justified that that's the end of the matter and rub our hands with it. We should be looking at wider lessons learned to see if there's anything that we can do to make sure that people don't make the same complaint in future.
Thank you. Mrs. Robinson?
Yeah, I agree. And we do that. If we have somebody that has a needs clarification, if you like, then maybe there's a step in a process that would have made it easier for them, then we can do that and we can explain that to them, and also with the service area. So I think we do try and do that, amend the process. As for if somebody calls us and is inquiring about something, we will explain there is a complaints process. Most of the time, I think they just need clarification that actually this isn't a complaint, it is a service request on some of the occasions. But if it isn't, we would raise a complaint. So we would tell them over the phone, it's on the website. We did have leaflets in the contact centre as well if they're unhappy. So I think that lessons learned are always in place, regardless whether it's justified or not justified, if there's a point. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Any more questions? Oh, Councillor Tapper.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question. When a complaint is received, is any attempt made to notify the councillors of the ward in which the resident lives that that complaint has been made? It may be that the resident hasn't gone through any of the councillors in their ward first before presenting that complaint. If that is not done, I would like to request that it is done in future.
Good idea.
No, we wouldn't do that at the present time. We would just try and resolve. Sometimes the councillor is aware of a complaint and we would keep them informed. But if we had a complaint, we wouldn't necessarily inform a councillor of that ward, no. Do you think it's something that we need?
I was going to ask you, do you think it's a good idea to implement that? Would it be too much work?
I think it may put an extra step in a process, which, but I suppose if you'd like to be informed of it and not necessarily have to do anything, but at least you're aware of a resident in your ward has an issue.
Yeah, that would be something which I think would be of value to us, to know that the complaint had been made by one of our residents, and simply to give us the detail of what it's about. At the end of the day, as I say, it may not be something that the resident has decided to initiate through us, but it may come back to us at a later point. That is always possible. It would be nice to be in the picture before it comes back to us, rather than to have to chase it up later to find out what it was all about, and what had actually happened as a result of the complaint being made.
Thank you, Mr. Tepper. Councillor Tepper. Mr. Pearson.
I was just saying, Chairman, we can certainly look at that, but I would say it very much depends upon whether the complainant wishes us to inform other people, like the councillor. One of the Ombudsman's complaints that I've got, particularly related to waste, is where an individual, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it was about a bulky waste collection outside of his block of flats, and we contacted Amy about that, and there was a complaint about us actually passing that complaint on, if you see what I mean. So yeah, we'll certainly look at that, but that is the proviso, as long as the complainant wishes that to be passed on.
I think that's perfectly acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. I think that's a good idea. If you can make a note of it for the officers to come back to us on that. Yeah, thank you. Any more questions? I'm unable to see all these hands up on my screen.
Councillor
Councillor
Wheeler has
Wheeler.
her hand up.
Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. It was just really relating to the 33% of complaints that were investigated and upheld, and whether or not the circumstances and the learning, not the details, so nothing that's going to breach GDPR, but the circumstances and the learning of that could maybe be shared with members of this committee so that we understand that. And also just looking sort of a little bit retrospectively, how many of the complaints that were upheld are similar to complaints that have been upheld during previous years? So have we learned from the complaints that have been upheld, and have they not, are they all new this year basically in comparison? And then just going back onto Councillor Tapper's point, maybe if on the online complaints process, there could just be a box that says, would you like us to inform your local councillor? That would probably speed up the process. I don't know how easy that is to embed into the form, but yeah, it's could we have a look at the type of complaint and the learning, and also could we see if any of the complaints that are upheld this year are repeats of previous years? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Robinson, you want to comment on it?
I think probably I would have a look at the report and have a look at the previous report and give you some more detail on that. Normally when the lessons have learned, because they're individual cases, if there is something, then a process will be changed, amended. So I do think that happens. Don't think there's any of the same cases as last year as this year. But I can have a look for you and get back to you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Robinson. If there are no more questions, shall I move on to expenditure on legal and professional, item number 5? Councillor Lewis is leading this. Over to you, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is one of the shorter items on the agenda tonight, and it's the details to spend in 2019-2020 of legal services and consultants. The list of legal service expenditure is in Annex A. The list of consultant expenditure is in Annex B. And the committee is advised to note the spend on legal services and consultants for 2019-2020.
Any questions on this item? Can't see any hands.
Councillor Bates.
Councillor Bates.
Yes, thank you. Can I just ask, is there any more detailed breakdown than this? Because it strikes me that that isn't really very much information for members to make a decision or be advised as to whether or not this is effective value for money being spent on behalf of our taxpayers.
Chair, if I may, just to say, yes, there is a further breakdown. Just to stress that the figures that you're seeing are the top level spend. All of that spend was within budget for the financial year 2019-20, and we can drill down to lower levels to specify exactly where that money has been spent. But yeah, absolutely. But this, as Councillor Lewis has pointed out, this report is just for this scrutiny committee to know at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. For those who have not met Mr. Horn, he's our new interim Section 151 officer, and say hello to him. Be nice to him.
Thank you.
I also am sorry. If there are no more questions, I'd like to ask a few, or one in particular. No other questions. Again, it's a detail I think we require. Overall, individually, it's fine. It may not be fine. We don't know
Held up on here.
who the supplier is, or
tried this, but all I'm getting up is my.
who the suppliers or who the what do you call, what purpose it has been spent on.
Through you, Chairman, if committee are so minded, I can gladly distribute to members the next level down, which identifies for each top level spend in areas like building control and car parking and so forth, exactly who we spend that money with. I can circulate that tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Particularly, I'm actually concerned about this finance cost on Annex A, 295, call it 696,000.
Yeah.
Well, it's a one heck of a figure as legal services in there. Anyway, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I'll distribute that tomorrow to all members. Thank you.
Councillor Galford.
Thank you, Chair. Is it also possible to have a comparison with last year, as it's very difficult to ascertain whether these are high costs, low costs, medium costs, or whatever? I think that would also be quite helpful, please.
Mr. Horn.
Again, through you, Chairman, absolutely. What I'll do then is I'll get the top line figures for 2018-19. These are the 2019-20 spending. So this is spending to the financial year that ended on the 31st of March, subject to audit. So I'll provide those figures and I'll provide an analysis for the previous year, which is 2018-19, to let members get a feel for how it's changed between the 2 years. But just to stress that all the spending 19-20 was within budget, so that it didn't go outside of the parameters of the budget we'd agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Any questions, Mr. Fashion?
Chairman, if I could also add that these costs do vary quite a lot from year to year, depending on what particular issue you've got. So you'll see in community services that I've got there's 229,000 on that. That's because DEFRA. Some people might remember that DEFRA served a notice on Surrey Heath, Rushmore Borough Council and Guildford Borough Council about air quality levels on the A331. And they also gave us £300,000 grant to actually put that right. Surrey Heath acted as the banker for that. So you won't see that sort of expenditure and income coming in future years. So it does vary a lot.
Thank you very much. Mr. Horn, could I suggest that if there's income coming in against an expenditure that we net it off?
Yeah, absolutely. Through you, Chairman, absolutely. I'll do that.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor Perry.
Sorry about the delay, I just found my mute button. Interesting to note that on the consultant schedule, well, the finance consultant paid us 51,000. What was the story behind that?
Through you, Chairman, it's an adjustment. We actually, it was actually expenditure that was coded to the wrong place. This is the raw data unaudited. And what happened was that some money was put into the wrong coding, and that actually relates to air, the air quality project, which actually comes under community. So we moved the spend from one budget to another. So it looks anomalous, but that is but the overall spend is the correct figure.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Mr. Horn, could I actually suggest that if there are anomalies, that you get the department to actually get it right before it actually comes to a committee? That saves a lot of time and effort. Thank you very much. Any more questions, folks? Councillors, rather. Folks, councillors, there you go. Got to have a sense of humour. Councillor Galliford. Right, we move on. Back to you, Councillor Lewis. Zero-based budgeting.
Thank you, Chairman. This is obviously slightly larger agenda item, so I won't read the full report. But in summary, zero-based budgeting is a way to reset the budgeting for service or department. Instead of altering the last budget based on performance in the last financial year, the budget is calculated as if setting it up from new. Can be used to uncover wasted budgets, etc. This is a very skilled process and time consuming. There's a danger of not recognising non-financial intangible assets, so it needs to be undertaken with care. The options for the committee this evening, is one, a zero-based budget to be commenced this autumn for services that are particularly reliant on income from fees and charges, with incremental budgeting process retained for all other services. Two, a full zero-based budget to be commenced this autumn. This would require additional resources and training for officers and members and could only be successfully implemented for the 2021-22 financial year. Or three, the incremental budgeting process be retained. This would potentially lead to inappropriate budgets remaining. The proposal is that the committee considers the options set out in the options and recommends a zero-based budget be commenced this autumn for services that are particularly reliant on income from fees and charges. The incremental budgeting process retained for all of the services. And the other options set out in 2 and 3 are not supported by the corporate management team. Thank you.
Any questions on zero-based budgeting? Can't see any hands. Councillor Perry.
Sorry, me again. I'm surprised that the officers concerned should consider zero-based budgeting to be extra work. When I don't understand how anybody can produce a budget without actually looking at the current spend on all parts of that, constituent parts of the budget. And that's there. And you refer back to the historical data as part of that exercise. What's so different about zero-based budgeting to what would normally happen? Are we saying that we just cut and paste what was there last year?
Mr. Horn, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, through you, Chairman. I take your point, Councillor Perry. I think the difference with zero-based budgeting is that you do actually go back to the drawing board, and you would be saying, for instance, for services, for all of the services, what is the absolute minimum that we're required by statute to provide? And that would exclude a number of things which this council provides, such as theatre, such as the day care centre, and so forth. And you would basically start from a blank piece of paper. Now that's in opposition to the kind of the extreme other version of that, which is you just simply take what you did last year and increase it by a bit of inflation. And what I think council is getting at in their motion is to say, well, let's look at the areas where we particularly need to think again about what we're doing. Those are the areas which going through the budget for this round are those areas that are particularly vulnerable or particularly dependent on income from fees and charges and rents and so forth, because those are the ones that during the downturn in the economy and the COVID pandemic are taking a real battering. Now, we lack the resources to do all of the services the council provides, but certainly by focusing on these particular ones that are in particular trouble at the moment, that's a really valuable piece of work. And I think if that's successful, I think it will be, we'll then come back next year and do another third of the council services, like refuse collection, street cleaning, and then the year after that we'll do another third and keep rotating those. So every third year there'll be a really good analysis of we'll go back to zero base to look again at what the council does. And I think that rigour will pay dividends to the council in terms of financial spend, income, and overall control.
Mr. President.
Perhaps if I could add to that, because I've been involved for many years at the council setting budgets, and I can assure you that each year a very rigorous process takes place. But as Mr. Home was saying, the difference between zero-based budgeting and what we do each year is that zero-based budgeting, for instance, in my area, would say, do you really need to have a day centre? Do you want to be running a day centre or not? So when I look at my budgets each year, I'm assuming you want me to still continue to run a day centre. But every line in that budget, I question it. Yeah. So can I save some money on electricity? Can I look at the food that we buy? Can I look at all those other issues? And it's the same with waste, for instance. I assume you still want rubbish collected. So I look at the contract and I look at other areas in which we can save money. And I know my colleagues do that. Zero-based budgeting is saying, do you really need a theatre? Do you need a day centre? Do you really want to be doing that? It's assuming that you're not providing any services whatsoever, build it up from scratch. So this is a compromise, what we're looking at now.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I add something to this? I mean, I'm the culprit who started zero-based budgeting at the council again. So it is a useful exercise. I do appreciate what Mr. Horn and Mr. Passion say with regarding this rolling side of the way we actually do our current forecasting. I looked at last year's forecasting. It's the most appalling forecasting I've seen in my 35 years of being in the finance division. But hence the zero-based budgeting is an important part, and it's a good idea to roll it and take the major parts like you have suggested and continue, but do it in a very rigorous way that we get the right answers. End of the day, we are going to not run out of cash. The money from the government, the grants from the governments are going to reduce. That's a known fact. So we have to be ready for any eventuality. Thank you. That's a comment, not a statement, not a question rather. Any other questions? Councillor Galliford, and then Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Chair. I did do a bit of research on zero-based accounting because I'd not even heard of it before, not being an accountant myself, and I can appreciate that it does take a lot longer. However, my question really is, if we were to take up a zero-based approach, does this give us a greater opportunity to look more closely at our commitment to the climate emergency? Because this has never been part of our budget before, and you know, we do need to start seriously looking at what funding we are putting forward for any motions that may be passed in future to support our climate emergency motion, basically.
Well, through Chairman, I mean, what I would say is that obviously part of the zero-based budgeting exercise is, as the Chief Executive has said, to challenge everything we do and say, do we really need to do that? But absolutely, I think the point you're making, Councillor, is that at the same time, obviously, to look at the things we don't do that we ought to be doing. Now, obviously, I have a role to play. We're trying to balance the budget and looking at reducing our spending or increasing our income to balance the books. But notwithstanding that, absolutely, if there are things which the council should be doing, then there is absolutely an opportunity to bring that into the zero-based budgeting exercise and look again at opportunities to do other things.
Thank you. Any questions? Any more comments? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bates.
Thank you. Yes, I got two comments. The first of which was that I must admit I was quite surprised when I read this report, because we decided that we would do this process at the full council meeting last February. And Chairman, you are right, you were the one who initially suggested that, but it was unanimously agreed, I believe, from all groups at the time. So that was at the end of February. I think it's been raised by several councillors since then to inquire as to the progress of that. And my recollection was we were advised that some preparatory work had been ongoing. And then I read this report that basically suggests that, well, we haven't done anything and it's going to be a lot of work and suggesting alternative process. So I suppose, and this isn't Mr. Holmes' fault, by the way, because he's only just started and I can appreciate his professional judgment is, well, that where we are, and I know we've had issues this year for various reasons, but it did slightly surprise me to read it, if I'm honest, because I thought we were a bit further forward than we appear to have been. So that's my comment. My question is that I'm not clear where the members are going to be involved in this process, and it links to quite a lot of what Councillor Galliford said, because the whole point of zero-based budgeting is actually that we do have the conversations that Mr. Pasham was talking about earlier. So he used an example of a day centre, and I personally think that is an absolute priority, but I'm aware that some members may not. And we as a council have updated our corporate plan, and we've given greater priority to poverty, which a number of us had a conversation about earlier today. We've given greater priority to climate change, and that's a decision and one that we which isn't bad when we obviously know overall control. I suppose the question really is,
sorry,
where are we?
Repeat what
where
you
are we
said.
actually?
You're freezing a little bit.
Okay, apologies. Sorry, I didn't. I don't know where I kind of got stopped, if you like. But basically, question is where movement in the political priorities process. Because am I frozen again?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was about where are the members in the political priority decisions with the corporate plan?
I think, Councillor Bates, if you don't mind, do you mind sending Mr. Horn the question, and we'll, when he replies, he can circulate it to the committee members, if that's okay, because the speech was not very clear. It was breaking up quite often.
Question was about the member involvement.
Yeah, if I could add a little bit through you, Chairman, what we're just bringing together now, just at an officer level, the budget timetable, the deadlines was to get all the bits and pieces together to make sure that the reports are brought through to members and onto full council next February to set the budget. And part of that exercise, obviously now we will incorporate the zero-based budgeting. And the proposal, which we're only discussing with the corporate management team at the moment, is to have a process of challenge where we would look, particularly for those areas, as I said earlier, where there is significant reliance on income for fees and charges and investment income and rent and so forth. And we would involve the cabinet, the relevant cabinet, administration, executive member, forget where I am, the executive members and the lead officers in that, and go through that and really put a lot of challenge into that, particularly where we're looking at income and the fact that we've seen a significant downturn in the economy, and then trying to get a feeling for when, if ever, these fees and charges are going to recover. So, for instance, if we're looking at planning applications and we know there's been a big downturn, when are we likely to see that come back next year, in a couple of years, or never? Are we likely to see the theatre reopen soon and get back to some level of income and so forth? So we will be looking at all of those things. So it's those that for this year, we will be looking particularly at that third of activity of the council where there's the reliance on fees and charges. But every year there would be that kind of challenge as part of the budget process. But Councillor Bates, I'll gladly send that to you in more detail, and I'll circulate it to other members of the committee.
Mr. Horn, I think the main question Councillor Galliford and Bates, Councillor Bates asked was, would the members be involved in this process? If so, my suggestion is that you should get them involved at the early stage, because they actually know what goes on at the ground level. Not that officers do not know, don't get me wrong, but it's important that they represent their residents in your process.
Well, then, through you, Chairman, I'll take that on board as a draft the budget timetable, which should be circulated within the next week or so.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wheeler.
Yes, I think really it's just to pick up on what Councillor Bates has put into the chat group, which obviously those listening can't see, and that is, this is about political decisions. This is about our priorities as members in terms of where the priorities lie. So is it poverty? Is it climate change? Is it the theatre? And really those decisions need to be made by the elected members ahead of the officers being in the position, so that those basic priorities need to be decided upon first. And going back to the fact, Chair, that this was something that was raised quite some time ago, I share a disappointment that we've not moved a little bit further forward on this and how we should approach this. So yeah, it's how are we going to politically get the priorities decided ahead of time. Thank you.
Mr. Horn.
Only to say, through Chairman, okay, I absolutely take that on board, and I'll make sure that gets folded into the budget process that we're about to launch. The aim is to have the whole budget put to bed, fingers crossed, this side of Christmas, so before the December break, and then we'll come back in January, February, just to finish off, and we'll be putting reports to full council in February to set the budget, and that will take it on board all these issues about zero-based budgets.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wheeler again.
Sorry, if I can come back, I don't think that until the priorities of the council are set, I think it's very difficult for you to move forward, because you may well decide to move forward on something which as members we don't see as a priority. And I will, hopefully Rodney can come back on this as well if he is sort of back online properly. But that bit has to happen first, and I feel very sorry for members. I mean, sorry for officers and for yourself, because I think they're slightly disabled because at the moment those priorities aren't set.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Can I suggest that when you sort of bring the timetable a little bit forward and circulate to all the committee members, so they can give their priorities, and for you to do the member participation. So the process starts like tomorrow, but not in reality, but as soon as possible. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor, I'm sorry, Mr. Passion.
Can I just add that members are absolutely right that it's the councillors who set the strategic direction of the council and sets the priorities. Some of those priorities have already been set via motions which have been agreed by council, which will be taken forward. And last year we had an annual plan that was agreed, and currently the executive members are looking at the 5-year strategy, and the strategy, the vision that comes out of that work will be go to all the members. And once that's agreed, then we will have to provide the funding and resources which enables that to be done. So it's absolutely right. It is the council's vision and the objectives that they want us to deliver. We will then put together a budget which would deliver those objectives.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could I add something to the Democratic Services Officer here? Could you actually kindly make sure that what we spoke today, the Section 151 officer follows it through before the next meeting? Thank you very much. Councillor Crowe.
Hi, thank you, Chair. It was just to say, obviously, because of COVID-19 as well, some of those things may now change going forward in the next 5 years. So yes, we definitely need to look at moving forward and making sure we do look at what is actually required with COVID and the economic climate going forward. So it's just really a comment, really.
No comment. Okay, thank you. It's just a comment. You want to make a statement?
I think that's exactly the point of our focus for the zero-based budgeting this year. Will focus specifically on those areas where the funding has been affected through COVID, and any other things we need to introduce because of COVID. That's extremely important to us.
Thank you, Mr. President. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Tapper. Sorry. Who was the one?
I note that at the end of this item, we have a number of options to consider, and we have a proposal and a recommendation to vote on. I'm assuming that the proposal that we adopt a zero-based accounting approach is because it is beneficial to the management of the council's finances. So I'm a little confused as to why the corporate management team seem to be against expanding the use of zero-based accounting beyond just those parts of the organisation which involve fees and charges. Would it not be in the interests of the council to train up its officers so that they are able to use zero-based accounting right across the board? It may not be possible to adopt it in time for the 21-22 budget, but surely that should be an objective that we should be working towards, so that we're not running a council where we're running two different methodologies of accounting for its operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pepper. Mr. Horn.
Through Chairman, I mean, Councillor makes a good point, and as I said, it's not for the lack of wanting to do it. It's simply in terms of resource allocation. The focus for next financial year will be on those areas which is in the downtime because of COVID, which is the point that Councillor Croke was making, which the Chief Executive has also commented on. But in reality, I mean, you're absolutely right, Councillor Tapper. I mean, what we will do is we'll push through and train up officers to look at zero-based budgeting right across the piece. So although, as I said, we're going to kind of do it in a rolling, if members are agreeable to do it in a rolling programme over 3 years, so that every 3 years an area will get a good looking through. Actually, in actual fact, we'll introduce it as a culture right across the organisation as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Any, Councillor Garrett?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few comments really based on some of the stuff that's been said. I was also at obviously Vice Chair, I was at the meeting when we discussed zero-based budgeting, which I totally back. In 30 odd years in business, I've done it on a regular basis in various different guises and companies, not necessarily to the same scale as a council, but it certainly is a very good way to do your budgeting, and I'm fully behind that. As I think Mr. Hone has just said, the point was they're not saying they won't do zero-based budgeting for everything. They're only saying for the next time, because of obviously time constraints, this is something they'll look at a particular department, and next time round look at the whole department. And the point reference timings, I mean, I think if I'm right, I could be wrong, this was originally discussed at the first meeting, which was probably in May. I think it might have been before, about zero-based budgeting. There's been a few things been going on. I know that council hasn't been sitting on their hands. I'm pretty sure they've been doing lots of other stuff. And the previous 151 officer, I think, was probably involved in lots of other stuff as well. So I know that we want it done and we want it done quickly, but I'm also confident that there's other stuff that's been probably more of a priority right now. So I'm fully backing the idea of zero budgeting, and I obviously want to get it done as soon as possible, but I'm also conscious that there's been other things on people's minds, and maybe we need to consider that in the fact the timings. Thank you.
I agree with you, Councillor Garrett. I support your view. Mr. Passion first.
I'm sorry for keep coming in, and but I just want to really emphasise to members is as if we're doing zero-based budgeting and the rest of it we're just doing incremental budgeting. That's not the case. Every single line in our accounts we look at critically each year. Zero-based budgeting in its purest sense is to say the council doesn't provide any services whatsoever. We have a blank sheet of paper and we build it up from scratch. So what we're saying as a management team is that we know we have to provide certain services. Some services have been really hit this year due to COVID, and we need to pay particular attention to those. But we do know that within a council, we need to continue to provide those services. So, so there is a very robust exercise which is carried out each year. We have each of those budgets are challenged. For my particular, one of my areas that I look at for the joint waste, last year it was zero-based budgeting. We actually had a complete blank sheet of paper and we built it up from scratch with staffing and everything. So I don't want people to go down the route that because it's not the zero-based budgeting in its purest sense, that there isn't each year a sense of zero-based budgeting where each of those elements are challenged.
Thank you, Mr. Passion. I think we got the message. Anyone else? Any questions? New questions? Nope. Great. Moving on to item 7. This is an exempt item. Sorry,
Chairman, I think.
Sorry, can I just say we're about to get to the hour mark. I don't know if anyone would like a quick break.
Anyone would like a quick break? 1, 2, yep. Let's take 5-minute break starting now, and then we'll come back and we'll continue. Thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine, for pointing it out. Andy, can I see the raised hand as to who has raised the hand?
So it should be in the top.
It doesn't, no, it doesn't come up.
A little blue icon.
No, it doesn't come up. I can't see anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't actually appear on here. You can't see it.
Okay.
I was struggling throughout the meeting.
But when you're on your own thing, you've got that participants list that you can
List
see
on the side.
See it on here.
It doesn't, nothing comes up in this corner
Nothing
here.
comes up here at all.
Okay.
That's the reason I was missing out people and relying on Catherine.
Look out for anyone that's.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, just so you're aware, we are now back live on
Thank you very
YouTube
much.
and
Thank you very
unmuted.
much. Councillor McLafferty.
Thank you, Chair. It was just, did we formally record the committee's view adoption of item 1 or option 1 on 6.1?
Sorry, you're right. We did not. Let's get back then. Right, we are back live and off we go. Thank you for that, Councillor McLafferty. I need a proposer for option 6.1. Councillor Garrett, seconder, Councillor Tapper. Thank you. Moving on to. Sorry?
Need to vote in
They need to
favour.
vote. Anyone objections, objecting to it? No? Are we unanimous? Everyone agree? Committee members, all agree. Thank you. Done. Moving on to item 7, agenda. This is in 2 parts. And
Chair,
I
could I just ask about this? You mentioned before the break that this was going to be an exempt item. Have you decided that this is now not going to be an exempt item? Because if it is an exempt item, I would like to object to it being an exempt item.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Tapper. Do you have are you proposing that?
I am.
Is there a second? Do you have a seconder for it?
Can I just?
Councillor Betton, sorry, Mr. Passion.
Yeah. Sorry, Chairman, if it helps. The actual item 7 is not exempt. It's just the details which is in the annex. If you want to go into details about the annex, then that would be exempt. But the main report is open. So I don't know whether that helps.
That does help. Thank you very much. So when we get later to the review of exempt items, which is what you're referring to, I believe, the supplement, that is when we can take a decision on whether it should or should not be exempt, and therefore that everything relevant to this particular item and discussion of it will be made public.
We could take the decision now and then just continue on to that item if it is accepted by the committee.
Chairman, the substantive item is public. It's only if you want to go into details about the individual acquisitions in the annex that would be currently exempt.
Anyone objecting to that? I don't see any objections, so I presume the annex is exempt. Am I right in understanding, committee? Yes. Show of hands, please.
Chair, before we go forward, there are 2 sections to that. The annex appears to be the motion that was passed at the previous meeting. Is that what we're referring to here?
No, it's actually the one which came to everyone separately, which is actually agenda item 7, which annex C.
Yeah. And B, Chair. Yeah. Which is the analysis of returns and so forth.
B on it. Okay. Annex B and C. You're right. It doesn't say B on it.
In which case I would like to object to those being kept exempt. I believe Annex B and C should be made public.
Councillor Wren? Councillor
Yeah,
Bates,
I completely agree. Why do we need to make it exempt? Or what's the intention of making these exempt?
Officer? Mr. Passion?
I mean, the reason the details about the acquisitions was originally exempt because it was commercially sensitive. I was going to speak to the monitoring officer about this, but he's actually online. We don't want to hide any, we don't want to actually have things in part 2 unless we absolutely have to. A number of acquisitions are quite have been quite a few years ago, and there's no reason really why they cannot be open. I don't know whether we can ask the monitoring officer for any help.
Gavin, do you want to say something? But there are 2 or 3 actually objections.
I mean, in my view, the annexes are exempt for a good reason, and the main reason is I'm not really sure it's in the council's interest for the tenants or potential tenants to know what everybody else's rent is, and if it's potentially possible that the council's bargaining power could be impacted in terms of negotiations for new leases, then that's a detriment to the council, and for that reason I would prefer that it is retained as commercially sensitive information. The council's made a decision to try and generate income through a commercial property portfolio, and to that extent it needs to act commercially with a different hat on. That's my view.
Thank you for that, officer. Actually, just to point out, I have looked at this schedule myself before I came here. It doesn't specify any individual tenants. It actually gives an overall value. That's all it does per property. Councillor Betton, then Councillor Garrett, then Councillor Bates, and then Councillor Wren.
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me. I can understand commercial confidentiality, but we do have a lot of public interest. I'm sure I am not alone in receiving a lot of emails on this issue, and a lot of those are saying that some properties are rent-free. Now, commercial confidentiality, rent-free and nothing else in between up to full rent, I don't see why this should be kept quiet. If people are emailing and putting it out on Camberley Eye, I see no reason why we can't discuss it.
Thank you. Councillor Garrett.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for giving the information out there. My concern is that some of the information is, with all due respect, is information that you've put together as well, which is also in the exempt items. Now, the original pricing is what it is, and that's in obviously minutes previously available. The other figures, which are assumptions on what it might cost now, is actually why we're having this meeting in the first place. But they are your assumptions based on the information you have received, but it's not from real, they've not been done by an organised committee, which is what we're trying to discuss and get sorted. So my concern is that some of the information is valid, but some of the information that's exempt isn't, because it's what you put together with other people and it's not come from an outside source. So my concern is that we might be tainting the information. I'm all for giving all the information if it's being confirmed to be correct, but I thought that was the whole reason for this meeting in the first place, was to get the base information and to see if we're in that place now. And I don't believe all this information gives us that.
Okay, can I answer that specifically to Councillor Garrett? The information which I had produced was actually in the public domain. All what I did was take that public domain information and apply the same principles as it was. So anyone can do this, literally. provided they have the rental income.
My argument is the chair of the P&F committee has given information which we're now going to propose to look at and then talk about and then try and get independent people to look at when we've already put information out there that you've already put together. So my concern is we're going to be giving ourselves, how can we make this a free and open thing if we're working on information that's going to be in the domain that you've already put together, which I get is already in the public domain, but the chair of the P&F committee has put this information together, which we are now going to get out to the public. That's my only concern.
I agree with you. I hear what you say, but someone had to put this information together, whether it's as a chair of P&F or whether it's you as a vice chair or any other committee member or any councillor could have put this information together, as long as they had the base information, which they could have got from the council.
Okay, I thought that's the reason for this meeting, was to discuss whether we go to an outside source to get the information or to have a discussion.
That's exactly the point. Once other members have seen the documents which you have seen and a handful of group leaders have seen, then the committee can decide whether they go to the outside body or to the suggestion which has been put forward by the officers. I mean, that's the whole point. So in order for them to make their mind up, this information has to be shared with a committee.
I totally agree that. My query is the exempt issue is if we unexempt it, everybody else sees it. I've got no reason to have an issue with anybody in this meeting seeing it, nothing at all. But if you unexempt it, then everybody in the whole of Surrey Heath sees it. And then you have the idea of having a free and open committee meeting to discuss it goes out the window.
With all due respect, Councillor Garrett, this information, even a resident could have got it. All what they had to do was apply on the FOI, got that information, apply the same principles. There's nothing wrong with that. Councillor McLafferty. Sorry, I'm in order here. Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Chairman, and apologies because I am cutting out regularly. So if I do that again, then I'll just leave and try and come in again. The query basically around this is that some of this information is already in the public domain, and some of it is not, I think. So I think all of it, apart from probably the third column from the right, is information already in the public domain. And therefore, I can't see myself what the problem is. Certainly, I'm almost certain that all the purchase prices are, and there may be some rental issues. But I think a lot of it is, and I think probably we just, before making a decision either way, is just ascertain which of those is correct.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bates. Next, Councillor Wren.
Thank you. Yeah, I think fundamentally we're kind of forgetting a fundamental point, which is that the owners of this mall is the residents, the taxpayers. So what we're trying to do is not make it, by releasing this information, is show our bosses what we've got and how much money we're making from it and what the rental income is, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that own it. That's the fundamental principle.
Yeah, I hear what you say, Councillor Wren. Councillor McLafferty.
Thank you, Chair. Just to Councillor Wren's point, you're absolutely right. We work for the residents, but they ask us at an election to make decisions on their behalf. And one of them is to run a business in a way that's actually for the benefit of as many residents as possible. And I think giving out particularly commercially sensitive information is not only, it's not a bad idea, it's a terrible idea. That the officer, the 151 officer, has already said that there is commercially sensitive information in here. May I suggest that we have the discussion in part 2, and then we can have a discussion at some other point where what is it that we're going to put out to the public. I am all for putting out as much information as possible, but I think the point, just to back up what Councillor Garrett was saying, that the information you've put together, Mr. Chairman, is absolutely in the public domain, but it also goes on to make some conclusions, which I believe are your own, right? And that's not the same as putting out a council paper, which has had verification from the officers. So I think it should definitely be that we need to discuss this, or sorry, the committee needs to discuss this in part 2, and then we can decide what it can actually be put out under advice from the 151 officer.
Thank you for that, Councillor McLafty. Could I answer some of those points? Getting back to Councillor Bates, yes, we could look at these numbers, Councillor Bates, and see which is sensitive and which is not. I've looked at it, like I said, before I came to this meeting. Rental income is in total. It doesn't say which tenant is paying what. It only gives a total figure. There's no specific tenant name mentioned. I can't see it. If I miss something, please excuse me. It does say something about a couple of tenants at the bottom of page on part B rather. We could scratch that out if we can, all of us, before we discuss it. The other thing on Councillor McLafty, it wasn't a conclusion, it was a calculation, Councillor McLafty. I had produced a calculation and presented it to, for example, to you as a group leader. So I have presented it to all the group leaders to show this is my calculation. I kept repeating it to all group leaders. There's nothing which I had created. It's a straightforward calculation. Conclusion is up to the committee to make. And that is what the discussion is all about. It's not my, I repeat, not my conclusion. It's the committee's. Committee has to decide whatever they say today, they need whichever way the committee moves, this particular PNF moves, because we have to actually, I totally appreciate what some of the councillors have said today. We represent the residents and it's residents' money. And PNF is here to scrutinize, not to accuse anyone. And that's not the idea of this whole game. I hope I have satisfied most questions. Councillor Bates, are you happy with what you've heard so far? Oh, he's gone off the screen. Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. Might I suggest that we delay the decision about making this public until after feedback from the working committee and or after the part 2 discussions? Much as I accept that there is no specific rent per unit per occupier, I'm quite sure that I could probably Google somewhere the rough square footage of the square in Camberley and each of the units in Camberley, and then do a backward calculation to know if I was a retailer in there, if I was paying too much money for the unit that I had. I think there are so many variables at the moment. I'm very keen that residents understand the impact of the decisions that have been made by this council in the past. And I think that those that were part of making that decision need to accept responsibility for the financial position that we find ourselves in. But I do think that when we present figures to the public and to potentially people that we could be entering into a commercially sensitive situation with, they need to be absolutely 100% right. They need to have gone through a period of interrogation. And so I'd like to suggest that we have a review as to how long this should be exempt for at the end of the exempt part of this meeting, by which time we'll have had further debate, and we have it as a standing committee agenda item for the Performance and Finance Committee on an ongoing basis. And I think that seems to me like a reasonable compromise for wanting to get as much out there as possible without potentially jeopardising future income for the council. And I would like to suggest that as a way forward, as a compromise way forward, to try and move forward with this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Good suggestion. Only main problem we would have had is actually if we had named particular tenant or particular value of the rent, which I see only two of their names appear. I don't see any other problem with it because currently the market is moving in a different direction to what it was when we all purchased this property, which you all accept. And so I personally don't see any problem in making most of it. I would actually, if you wish, we could take out part B out of this equation, which has got most of that information. Then come back, discuss part B separately and look at parts C as a whole. That's my suggestion. Anyone opposing to that? Councillor McClafferty, you want to say something?
So just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, item B is the one that gives the details on the financials of the investments, etc., in terms of returns, etc. Are you saying, I didn't get what the next bit was, the item C, is that what's called Appendix 3?
Appendix C, yeah. Which is actually a separate document you should have received.
That's actually the item I've probably got more of an issue with, to be honest with you. If that separate document is the one that's got lots of assumptions based on public information, I get that, but it's based on...
No assumptions there. Councillor Garrett, I repeat, absolutely no assumptions in any of that. It's all facts, factual. Please don't keep repeating its assumption. It is false to make that a statement. It's all facts. Okay. I repeat, it's all facts.
Okay, I'm not going to repeat what I said as well, but okay, that's fine.
Not to anger the chair anymore, right? But just for instance, you have chosen the comparators to the square. You've chosen those, so there was an assumption that they're reasonable in terms of comparison. What may be factual is that what the numbers are to do with those, but you have chosen those as a comparator, and that may not be accurate. Hence, it's an assumption. I think that's what Councillor Garrett is getting.
Yeah, hence my proposal that we get a third party to look at it.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, Gavin. Sorry, monetary officer.
Yeah, I think it's just worth me coming in here and making the point that it has been drawn to my attention that some of the detail in Annex C is not accurate, particularly around the publication of the 2016 report. So I'd be concerned about Annex C not being validated by officers and then made public, particularly if there are inaccuracies in the narrative and some of the conclusions in the data. I think it's perhaps a document that needs to be looked at a bit more carefully before it's put into the public domain. So I think that's essentially my concern, is about the validation of it from an officer perspective.
Okay, can I ask you a question, monetary officer? You think the public residents could not have got this themselves?
It's not in terms of the raw data. Potentially they could have got some of the raw data. I think it's some of the conclusions and some of the narrative perhaps isn't accurate, and those concerns have been raised with me. And so from that perspective, I think it is a document that probably needs to be looked at.
Because I only wrote that particular report. So if they can highlight the assumptions, I'm more than happy to take them to the points where I got that information from. Councillor Perry is... Sorry, Councillor Perry.
I don't.
Sorry, Section 151 officer. After that,
Gavin, have you finished?
Perry. Sorry.
Did Gavin finish?
No, he hasn't.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of whether it's realistic to look at this document now and amend it tonight so that somehow it's in a state for publication, I don't think is realistic. I think there were some quite detailed concerns raised about the narrative on the publication of the 2016 report,
okay,
and what actually happened in 2016.
Sorry, with all due respect. So what we are doing is here is wasting valuable time. So let's actually take a vote with the committee members
Chairman, it is the monitoring officer's duty to point out any issues that he has regarding the procedure. Currently, Annex B and C is in exempt. There is an item, agenda item 9, which we would review exempt items. But the main body of the report obviously is in the public, and the main body of the report can be discussed. The annexes B and C are exempt items, and you'd need to go into part 2 to discuss that. But agenda item 9, you can then review those exempt items.
Monitoring officer, is that your view?
Yes, I mean, my view is it's exempt for a good reason.
No answer would suffice. Is that your view? That
yes, that would be my view.
Part B and C, good. Could you also kindly put that in writing to our committee members as to why you think it was in part B, say part 2 of this discussion, so we are all committee members are aware of your ruling. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Councillor Perry, before we move on to the main item 7, and then we'll look at B and C and the exempt, if that's what the monitoring officer.
Fine. Thank you, Chairman. I just query why it's so important to get these particular annexes out at this point. The general principle of what you're doing here, and that's to question the history of it, no problems with at all. I think some of this data is commercially sensitive and it serves no purpose. So I don't see why it's so important to get this out at this stage. I actually agree they should be verified by a working party made up of people that everybody's happy with. And if at the end of the day they think it's important to release this data for a particular reason, then yes. I don't understand the benefit of publishing out there. I see more dangers than benefits, is my point of view.
Thank you for that, Councillor Perry. We'll take that on board. Let's move on to very clearly monitoring officer's ruling stands. So I'm not going to discuss that any further. Let's go to agenda item 7. Once we discuss that, then we move on to part B and part 2. Then we'll discuss appendix B and C. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah, thank you. It's 8:30. We've spent 30 minutes discussing a procedure. Right, let's carry on. Thank you for that, Vice Chair. You started it. So let's move on. On agenda item 7, any questions? I'm sure all of you have read it.
I think Councillor Lewis is going to introduce.
Sorry, Councillor Lewis, please introduce that.
Yeah, thank you. I can introduce this, though the portfolio does say leader. I don't know if that's significant.
Sorry, I missed that, Councillor Lewis.
Item 7, it comes under the leader's portfolio. I'm quite happy to do the introduction.
Leader.
That's what it's listed as.
Unfortunately, leader is not on the committee, unless of course leader wants to step in to help you out. I'm happy for the leader.
No, I'll do the introduction, but I was just pointing it out. Right, this agenda item has been brought before the committee after a motion at full council on the 22nd of July 2020 regarding articles in the national press. The motion called for a report into property investment for Treasury management and also called for the production of a property investment strategy report. At full council, it was agreed that this motion would be discussed at this meeting. The options before the committee are: 1, to recommend to council that the investigation proposed the motion to council on the 22nd of July 2020 be agreed and a budget be approved to undertake this work. 2, agree that proposals are set out in paragraph 10 of the report are pursued, and or 3, consider any other actions it considers appropriate. The recommendation to the committee is: 1, the proposals to establish a town centre officer group and widen the remit of the property group in order to provide increased focus on property and investment by the officers be endorsed. 2, a task and finish group with a remit to examine the advice provided by professional agents to the council regarding its property acquisitions and management to feed into the council's future property investment strategy be established. And 3, the membership of the task and finish group be agreed as considered appropriate. Thank you.
Any comments, questions? Councillor Wren.
Thank you. I just want to raise a question for the officers, maybe to answer. One of the things that concerns me is that there appears to be only one valuation that was done at the time of acquisition. I just want to clarify, is that the case, that there was only one valuation done by one surveyor?
Through you, Chairman, yes, that is the case. I mean, obviously, I'm a bit of a newbie here, but what happened was that the council went out to tender for various advisors, and Montague Evans won the bid, and they then carried out the valuation work.
I'd rather,
Chairman, you probably know more about than I, so
I'd rather not say comment at this stage. I'll wait for the close period to come. I'll make a lot more comments then. I think we should keep the people's names though.
Okay.
Thank you, because we did specifically keep doing this option because we don't want to mention names. Thank you. No, Councillor Wren, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's quite troubling for me, because if you're going to make the biggest ever investment this council's ever made, and you're going to go buy a shopping mall, and you're going to get one valuation done, you're going to go, yep, that's it, great, £86 million, let's go spend it, and not go and get a second valuation, or maybe a couple more valuations to check, A, is that the right valuation? Have we valued it right? And B, if it isn't the right valuation, if we get a valuation that's under that, that would increase the leveraging power of the council. Because if I can come to you and say, right, I've got a lower offer on the valuation, then surely logic suggests that we've got then more bargaining chip or negotiating strategy to then negotiate under the value that was initially proposed by Montague Evans.
Thank you, Councillor Wren. Do you want to comment on that? No, you don't. Councillor McClafferty.
Thank you, Chair. Just on Councillor Wren's point, the SMB had a meeting with Montague Evans as part of the property portfolio discussion. And of course, this was one of the things that we discussed because we knew it was coming up at the committee. And my understanding is, apart from the fact that Montague Evans are one of the UK's leading, if not the leading property valuer, their process involves going out to third parties to have their valuations verified. And I think from memory that they had 2, if not 3 other companies verify the valuation. It's a very, very complicated process they go through. And it would be very, very helpful, I think, if they were to be in front of this committee and talk through the extensive way that they did value the property back in 2016. But just to answer Councillor Wren's thing, I agree entirely. Just having one valuation would be very difficult. But
Yeah.
as they go out to tender, they won it, and then as part of their process, they have other people value the thing as well.
Could I ask you a question, Councillor McClafferty? Have they actually provided you with that evidence?
I wasn't part of the team that did the buying back in 2016, but they talked us through the process. I can't remember who it was they actually used for the extra valuations, but they're more than happy to provide whatever information this committee requests. That they certainly were as open as we needed them to be in terms of the executive. So they could, I'm sure, would just be happy to provide the valuations and who did them and the qualifications of the people who made the valuations.
Thank you, Councillor McClafferty. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you. Not wishing to start another 30-minute conversation, which is obviously out of order. Just wondering, I could be wrong, Mr. Hone, and you will correct me if I am. does the HM Treasury not have to get a valuation before the money is borrowed against this? I say, I've read the minutes of the previous meeting in 2016 and that came out as me as being something that was there. I could be reading it wrong, but is that correct?
Through you, Chairman, not quite correct, if I may say, Councillor. I mean, the council is able to borrow, provided it can borrow within the parameters set out in its Treasury Management Strategy. And every year in February, the council, when it sets its budget and council tax and so forth, also rolls forward its Treasury Management Strategy, and that looks at the parameters in which it can borrow. Now, the council is entitled to borrow for any purpose which you know delivers benefit to the residents of the borough. So to that extent, as long as it's got the headroom to borrow, it can do so. Having said that, obviously, it needs to have regard to these issues of affordability and best value and all these other things. So it would have done that. The Red Book is a guidance which is kind of available. I'm being a bit vague because I'm not sure to what extent the council had recourse to that when it was looking at the value, but certainly that wouldn't be the only reason. That wouldn't have been, if you like, the gateway to either borrowing to fund it or not. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, I think thank you for that, Mr. Hall. I think if I understood him correctly, did the council have to provide the treasury evaluation in order to borrow?
No.
They didn't. No. How did they borrow? Just by an email or something? What's the methodology?
Well, in terms of borrowing from the PWLB, provided you can satisfy fairly, as I say, the fact that you need to set a treasury management strategy each year, so you need to demonstrate to the PWLB that you have done so. And on that assurance from the Section 151 officer, you can borrow within the parameters set within the treasury management strategy.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. And although you were saying, is it just a simple email? Actually, it's just a phone call.
It's a phone call.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Councillor Wren.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I remember the previous chief executive, not the one before you, but the one before that. I remember just that conversation that you basically just call up and say, yeah, I need £86 million. Can you give it to me? And they'll be like, yeah, have you got a valuation? And here you go, and there's your money. In about 48 hours, I believe, you can get that kind of amount of money from the Treasury, which is, certainly an interesting dynamic. And I think that's part of the reason why most recently the government has started to question council's acquisitions with a recent committee looking at those kinds of problems, because they probably realized that being able to just make a phone call and ask for several, potentially hundreds of millions of pounds and just giving it over might not have been such a good idea. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but something that I think is very concerning.
Well, through your Chairman, if I may, I mean, I'll take the point that Councillor Wren is making. I won't take too much of the committee's time, but what happened in last October when the Chancellor became concerned about these issues about councils overstretching themselves in terms of borrowing, is that he introduced a new benchmark level for borrowing from the PWLB, which was 1.8% above gilt, which made borrowing rather expensive, with the idea of curtailing and reining in councils borrowing for various purposes, for investment and so forth. He then revised that because that applied to all borrowing, and he realised that affected the impact of the ability of local authorities to deliver on their housing commitments. So he reduced that figure to 0.8% above gilts for housing, 1.8% above gilts for everything else. What we're hearing is that the autumn statement is in the next 6 weeks or so, that the Chancellor may look at reducing that 1.8 for other borrowing to just 0.8, because things have happened since then. And rather than trying to restrain local authorities from investing in local infrastructure and economic development, given the downturn in the economy and COVID and all those things, he may now actually want to stimulate that. So we might actually see the ability for local authorities to actually borrow more cheaply. And I take absolutely the point that all of this has to be done within the parameters of affordability. So a local authority, yes, the opportunity to just bring up the PWLB and borrow money is one thing, but the ability to be able to finance that debt and so forth, is a matter, a very serious matter for council, and that will all be included in the Treasury Management Strategy. It won't be entered into lightly.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Wheeler, is your hand up? No, sorry. No.
Chair, if you don't mind me interrupting, Councillor Bates did have his hand up, but he's just rejoined the meeting.
Oh, right. Councillor Bates.
Yes, I am sorry for keep coming up tonight. I'm not sure what the problem is up in Old Dean tonight, but my question was really regarding the terms of reference to the proposed working group. So if someone else has raised this, then apologies. But I would actually suggest that the terms of reference be changed slightly. Just bear with me a sec. I would specifically suggest looking at the information that was available to members at the time. I'm thinking particularly of the MAL, and also the paperwork that was available to members at the time. I was obviously one of those who did make that decision, although it wasn't a decision that I personally agreed with. And I think that decision, as I said at the full council, has been made, but we may have some lessons to learn regarding what information was available to members, the decision-making process of that, and I think that's quite reasonable to look at fresh. So I think that might be relevant to the terms of reference. You're obviously suggesting asking the professional agents, and I'd agree with that, but it would be helpful in my view for members now just to review what information did councillors receive and what advice was given to them. I do not want to be part of the task and finish group myself, because I think it'd be better looked at by members who were not involved at the time.
Any other comments? Councillor Garrett.
I would like to second that comment by Mr. Bates, although I haven't got any problem with my Wi-Fi up here on me. So mine seems to be okay. Yeah, I totally agree with what Councillor Bates says. I understand we've looked at the possibility of having an independent person come in, and I also understand the idea of having an internal task and finish group. Now, I get that a task and finish group internally could be seen as being an internal audit, but I agree that if it's done by people that weren't there previously, and actually, as Mr. Holmes said when we had our Zoom meeting at the chair's briefing, he would lead that, and obviously we need to decide the makeup of that. I would happily be involved in that, because I too want to get to the bottom of what the facts really are, because I want to understand it. From the information that Councillor Malvaganam has given, it does look that things aren't necessarily as they could have been, but that is, I won't say it, that's the information that he has got. I would like to see a full discussion. And then if at the end of that discussion we decide, you know what, we do need to get an independent person in, that's fine. But I'm also conscious all this is around the residents' money, and I don't want to spend another £110,000 of the residents' money looking at something which actually, if we actually got Montague Evans in and all the relevant parties in, we might actually be able to solve that internally without having to pay the 110,000. Now, I know officers' time is not free, and I get that, but there is a cost involved in that. I get that, but I certainly would prefer to go down the route of an internal task and finish group. And then if we say, look, you know what, we can't get the information we want, it's not going to work or whatever, then yes, I will fully be behind getting independent people in. Thank you.
Councillor Wren.
Yeah, I get that. I personally would prefer, and I guess I'm proposing an amendment to have this done by an external auditor. One of the big things for me would be, it's almost going to be unavoidable that this is going to pass an officer that was there at the time. And for me, I think for protecting the interest of the officers is to have it done off the offing by an external officer or external, investigation, as opposed to just doing it internally. And then if we turned out at the end of the internal investigation, well, it needs to be done externally, why don't we just do the straight up external investigation from the offing? Also, in terms of costing, yes, there is a cost to doing it in external, which obviously we don't want to do. But at the grand scheme of things, we've paid how much for this mall? How much did this whole thing cost us? So £110,000 in the grand scheme of things is not as much as the whole thing has cost us in the first place. And I think we'd all, as it seems to be agreed, we want to get to the bottom of this. So it seems to me the most sensible option, instead of going through an internal process that might lead to an external process, that we just go straight to an external process, protect officers that they were there at the time, and then we just get it over and done with that way.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Councillor Wren. Councillor Garrett.
I just like to make a small point. I agree that it was whatever it was, valued at 100 million. I also read the minutes. I understand this was a 50-year investment. If I bought a house, I would practically guarantee that over a period of time, it's going to lose its value. I'm not selling the mall now. I'm not looking to sell the mall now. Maybe in 50 years, we might be looking to sell the mall. So the value of it in 50 years surely is the relevant cost. I appreciate that values have gone down. I don't miss that. I don't miss that point at all. And the point is whether it's was worth that initially. I also get that point, but I also get the point that we are not looking to sell it today. So do we really need to do that and look at the values moving we really need to be looking at the values moving forward for 50 years. So it's not lost on me, the fact that it might not have been worth that value at the beginning. I appreciate that's what this is all about. I get that, and I agree with that. I'm just worried that we're looking at this saying we've only had it X amount of years, and I think Mr. Home gave us some figures at the meeting where they were on a cycle of 9 cycles. I did listen, Martin, and we're only in the first bit of that 9 cycle. So yeah, I get all the points, but we're not looking to sell it tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Councillor Garrett. Mr. Councillor Tapper, Councillor McLaughlin, then back to Councillor Wren.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I hear what Councillor Garrett is saying, and it is something which has been quoted many, many times. The fact, however, is that the properties were not bought solely on a 50-year loan. A large proportion of what was borrowed was actually short-term loans, and in fact we've been forced to renegotiate those loans recently. And renegotiate them on the basis of a much reduced value in the property itself. Now, I understand we have successfully renegotiated those loans, but the impact of the reduction in the value of the property has impacted the renegotiation of those short-term loans, undoubtedly. So it's not quite as simple as Councillor Garrett has put it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Tapper. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to just make a comment on Councillor Wren's point that in terms of protecting the officers, I do appreciate that. I think that's an excellent idea. I've just jotted them down. The decision making was done differently, I think, prior to this council, and it was focused quite narrowly into a small group. The chief exec, the leader, the 151 officer, and the head of legal were really the team that did the analysis of that. And then, of course, they presented papers to the full council. And of course, the chief exec, the leader, the 151 officer, and the head of legal, who were all involved, are no longer with the council. So I think the officers that remain are pretty safe in that they were outside that circle that looked at the properties. And just on Councillor Tapper's point, I applaud the 151 officer for the fact that we haven't locked ourselves into a 50-year loan, which would probably be with the PWLB. As we were just saying, the interest rates that they're charging are significantly higher than you can get on the 2-year window, where you can borrow in short term. And it's been raised, I think, several times at audit, where the 151 officer has confirmed that they are monitoring it all the time to make sure that when there is any kind of increase in the rates from short term, that they can immediately confirm with the PWLB a longer term rate, which would be higher. And I think I'm right in saying that it's saved us hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not more, in terms of interest since we bought the I keep wanting to call it the mall, but the square.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Anyone else?
Councillor Gallagher and then Councillor Wheeler.
Councillor Gallagher and Councillor Wheeler, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I would be very reluctant to support spending public money on another investigation that should never have been necessary in the first place. However, I'm not sure I'd be totally satisfied with any internal inquiry. You know, would members on a working group have the necessary experience and expertise to really dig as deeply as we need to and investigate all of these things? No matter how pure our intention, we all have unconscious bias, and there is, of course, groupthink comes into it there as well. So I'd be a little bit worried that, you know, we could possibly at a later date be accused of who knows what. So, you know, at the end of the day, an outside investigation would be more robust, and that's what I would favour, I believe.
Thank you, Councillor Gallagher.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the documentation, you know, the word regeneration, it's all over the documents as if it's a panacea cure for all ills. And whilst I know that councils take on the social factor and the not-for-profit side of things, I think, you know, we did pay a premium for the privilege of that situation, and we need an outside investigator to look at how this came about. My other concern, I'm not pointing fingers, but when there are deals of this size, they normally involve hospitality, and I would be very interested to see whether there are any records of hospitality being either given or received whilst this deal was being negotiated.
Okay, I mean, Councillor Gallagher, I take your point. I think let's not digress away from the main point here, which is actually the purchase price and the valuation of all the properties. That's the whole point of this committee meeting today. I do thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate that. Next one, Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. It's unusual for me to begin to lose the plot, but I have to confess I have slightly lost the plot on this debate. And I'd just like to clarify on a couple of points that have come through. So much as I accept that it was a very small decision group, I think it has to be said that that decision came back, I am assuming, and would have been discussed with the executive, because I can absolutely assure you that if I was a member of the executive and a decision of this size was being put forward to me, I would want to have all the detail. I wouldn't take it on the say-so of just a very few number of people. So I don't think we can move that aside completely, much as I'm sure it would be convenient to do so. The other thing as well is going back to the points that have been made about regeneration and the fact that it's a long-term investment and that we're not looking to sell it immediately. I do have the benefit of having sat in the full council meeting when it came forward and raising at the time that Montague Evans were both the managers and the advisors, which I think the analogy I used at the time was the fox watching the hen house. It was sold to us as an investment. It was reiterated over and over again during a number of these that with the cuts in grants and with the cuts in funding that we were getting from central government and county, that we had to invest in order to be able to maintain services for our communities. And with that in mind, my concern about having an external valuation, which is something that was raised at the committee meeting before this motion came forward to this committee, at the full council meeting before this came forward to this committee meeting, is that we are throwing good money after bad. It is at best a risky investment, at worst one that is potentially going to call into question our ability to provide services for our residents. I think that the first step for this is an internal working group. And if there are expert questions that they feel that they can't answer or that they need additional support on, then I think we go out for ad hoc consultancy support as that working group feel is necessary. But to sign the whole lot over, I feel is doing what potentially some may feel happened before, which is handing over decisions that should be made by elected members to external bodies and external advisors that have proven not to be the best thing potentially for residents. So you know, a number of things in there, but I would like somebody to succinctly please put back to me. There have been a number of amendments and things that have been put forward, and before we go to any vote, if somebody would be kind enough to succinctly reiterate exactly what it is we're deciding upon, I would be very grateful. Can I also say that in 5 years, I think it's the first time I've asked for that. So please bear with me if I've not quite managed to follow everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Let me actually try and sort of give you the answer to the last question you raised as to what are we trying to achieve here. What you have in front of you is in option 10, or point 10, yeah, which is the options. So let me take you to the page so we are all on the same page, so to speak. Point 11, sorry, beg your pardon. On point 11, the committee has the option 1 to recommend to the council that the investigation proposed in the motion to council on the 22nd of July 2020 be agreed and a budget to be approved to undertake the work. Point 2, agree that proposal set out in paragraph 10, which is the task and finish group, etc., yeah, be pursued. Point 3, consider any other action that is considered appropriate. That's what the options we have. Yeah, and if it, sorry, Councillor Chapman, in a minute, if I can finish. Thank you. And then you have the recommendations from the officers. So the options are in front of you. This is what we need to do. Now, I have a point to make on this entire thing. Do we have the qualified people within the council? No disrespect to any of the officers. I never have disrespect. I have no intention of disrespecting any officers. To actually carry this out in an unbiased way. I mean, I prepared this in a very, I like to think in a very unbiased way. And I like to think I presented it in a very unbiased way. I presented it in a very financial way, but unbiased. So let's leave that to a side. Do we have the internal resources to do it? Is point 2. Now, if we have the internal resources, how many of the councillors are willing to sit on it? And do we have councillors who are capable and do have the capacity to do this work? That's point 3. If somebody can satisfy all this, then I would go along with it. Even before we do that, my main point is, without looking, some of the committee members have not seen the workings, yeah, or what it could have been. I'm not saying it would have been. I would never say it would have been. Could have been if the valuation was even off by 1 or 2%. That is how important the decision would be of appointing an internal person or an external person. Councillor Horn this afternoon highlighted the fact that the next council meeting is in December. I must actually set it out to the committee members as well. The full council meeting is next December. We could have finished this in July or whenever it came up. Yeah, and so which is where in September it's dragging on for another 3 months. I don't mind it dragging on. For me, no skin off my nose. We can literally drag this on for a year. Absolutely no problem. Or do we want to actually bite the bullet and get on with actually finding out the real reason, the rationale, the reason, whether the value was correct or not? It's something which I as a councillor would like to know for my residents. I've said my piece on this. And even if we do this decision, it may be appropriate to actually, for some of the committee members who have not seen the workings or whatever the thing, you already have it in published form. You can read it, call me. I'm happy to take you through that. If you're happy with what's going to happen next, it's up to you all. This is a committee. It's democracy in action. Councillor McLafferty, Councillor Chapman is, oh, Councillor Chapman first.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'd like to go into this a little further as to why we bought the MAL. Now, Councillor Wheeler has just said it was all about investment. It certainly wasn't. And it says that in the report. I was heavily involved in that on the committee. It was all about regeneration of the town centre. You also see that the MAL, it wasn't just the MAL, it included stores like Order stores and other stores and shops. We knew we'd need to get Order stores, etc., to carry on the regeneration of the town centre and that London Road block. So it was about regeneration. Now, going further into this, the MAL and the London Road frontage, the shops there and Camberley were beginning to look really dour, and they needed upgrading and regeneration. Residents remarking about the state of it on the London Road, hence the inclusion into that 2016-17 corporate plan. At the time, Capital and Region had no intention of upgrading that MAL nor doing anything with the Alders building. We knew that. We knew that. So it was about regeneration. It was the right thing to do, because this is the way it's looking good, beginning to look really good now, the town centre. So there had to be a decision made, and I think it was the correct decision. I'm not talking about the finances. It's what we did. It was for regeneration.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chapman. I think it was Councillor McLafferty. Did you want? Sorry? Yeah, Councillor McLafferty. You want to come in next?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Chapman there that it's been fantastic that we've actually had such a strong income from the square, but the square was, the mall was destined for collapse, really, in terms of it would have been a ghost town had we not purchased it. But I know this is about the finances. If I may, Chair, and this is unusual, you and I have had a conversation about how this could proceed before the meeting. And the problem, I think, is that we as a council need to be looking forward, but it's clear that we're not going to have everyone looking forward and what we need to be doing in the future for the residents until this has been cleared up. And a number of 110,000 has been mentioned as a cost to this. And I know, and this is where, forgive me for quoting you outside the meeting, but I hope you won't mind, but you felt that that number was excessive. And I agree that 110,000 is a gigantic sum to spend on what is effectively external experts, right? Not investigators and stuff, but experts who can advise the members on these things. So if the number was a much more manageable number, I think most of the members would be happy, and it would give us the ability for the external experts to verify and to ask questions that need to be asked. And if we could get to the bottom of this, and I don't know what it's going to show. I believe that there's nothing wrong, and I believe, as Simon Little, the previous 151 officer, said, that he believed that the valuation was right, and I think we've had other people say that. But we need to put this to bed so we can start looking forward. And if the quickest way of doing that is an external expert comes in and helps the members to get to the bottom of this and comes to a conclusion, good or bad, at least we can then move on from this and start talking about the next 3 years between now and unitary. So is there any way that we could discuss having a much more manageable budget, and then perhaps the working group can call in the experts as your original motion called for, Mr. Chairman, and we could move on and really try and start to get this done and over with so we can start looking forward.
I agree with you entirely, Councillor McLafferty. I mean, 110,000 was a figure quoted by the previous interim section 151 officer. I wrote to him and queried that amount. He did actually say of that is 50,000 is staff time. So at that point, I did write back to him and say, and he himself actually in his email wrote to me to say that is sunk cost, which is fundamentally officer time. If that was officer time, what I actually told him, this need not be extensive like the previous investigation, which I will not mention at this meeting, where lots of officer time was spent. If you take it relatively speaking, yeah, that took a lot more time, and we'd be talking possibly millions on the officer time. Yeah, let's park that to a side. The crux would be the cash out of the council, in my opinion, okay, could be no more than 40 to 50K. Yeah, if at all. It's how we actually get there. And this would most likely would be a desktop valuation based on the historical facts. And this can be done by experts out in the real world. I mean, like you, Councillor McLafferty, I genuinely want to go forward. I really do want to go forward. I want the council to be ready for unitary. And we can't carry this in the back of our head all the time. It's not you and I talking, it's the residents are talking about. And the residents will not rest until we put this to bed. And it's the noise, for me personally, noise is getting louder. Most likely quite a few of them are watching us. I don't know how many people are watching us today, but quite a few could be watching because they would have seen the agenda today. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea what the numbers are. Not interested. But this is what I'm actually interested. Sorry, Councillor McLafferty, carry on.
So, thank you, Chair. Well, if I may, when you mentioned 40 to 50, and I'm a lot happier with 40 than I am with 50. Right, it takes a lot for this council to earn £10,000. So, if the budget was something like 40,000, and that was then meant for external experts, I don't believe it's just a case of you can appoint an external expert and say, look at this. Councillor Wheeler's perfectly right. It's another external person telling us what we should think. And the members have to be involved. And I like Councillor Bates' idea that it should be people who were not there in the original decision making. But it seems to me that I don't think we're actually that far apart in terms of having a working group that has access to external experts who can come in. They can not only help the members understand, but they can actually help the members to ask the questions that they should be asking, right? If you get the right people. And that then could seem to me that you could get to the bottom of this quite quickly and do that. But I think we all agree 110,000 is an unacceptable number to be spending on an investigation like this. But if it means that we could do it for 40 and get to the bottom of it, then I think most people, most members, and even the members, your residents that are talking to you, I can't say that I'm getting an awful lot of emails and contacts asking me about this. They're asking me more about what's going to happen in the next 6 months or 12 months to the town centre, or jobs, rates, business rates, and all this. They're much, much more important things, I think. But I think we clearly cannot move forward until the group get to the bottom of this. So I think we're a lot closer if we could actually move to the setting a budget which is realistic. The working group will get together with expert witnesses, expert help, and we could get it done.
Thank you, Councillor McLafferty. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Off the back of that, if I'm allowed to, I don't know if I am, I would be happy to propose exactly that we set a cap of £40,000 to have external people come in alongside running the internal investigation that we had also suggested, because if we were going to do an internal one anyway, there would be a cost involved into that, as I alluded to earlier. So if we're taking the cost involved in that out of the equation, based on what you said, and we take the 40,000K limit, that means we're covering both bases. We've got an external, we've got an internal, and hopefully, as Councillor McLafferty says, we can then move this forward. I actually also have got no residents actually asking me about this. They've got other things that they're asking me about. That's not to say you haven't got them and other people haven't, but I certainly have had no residents asking me specifically about this issue. But I also understand, as Councillor McClafferty says, this seems to be a sticking point. I am all for it being investigated. So I propose exactly that. We do 40K to an external company to come in, along with an internal audit with members, preferably probably ones that weren't involved in the initial decision. Thank you.
Thank you for that, my Vice Chair. Sensible proposal. Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it sounds like a very sensible proposal indeed. So I'm happy to second that proposal if no one else is keen to come forward. I just wonder if also maybe we could, I understand the council meeting that concerned was the 24th of August 2016. Looking at council minutes, the majority of those minutes are still exempt. And I wonder if maybe we could take the appropriate steps to find out whether or not those minutes can now be released and no longer be exempt and to be publicly available via our website, which they're not currently. So I don't know, I'm not quite sure which the correct committee is for that. But again, I think that would go some way to alleviating some of our residents' concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. I mean, I as a councillor, I've raised that same point with the CEO, interim CEO, about exempt items still being exempt. Maybe I've written to the monitoring officer on that matter as well in the past, and to the interim CEO on the exempt items. Maybe they could actually re-look at this as a outstanding item from PNF to actually come back to us as soon as possible after look at all the documents to say what is exempt and what we can release as exempt and what documents are still exempt. Yeah. So we are aware of the exempt items. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. I think before we discuss spending £4 or 40,000 or whatever, we need a very clear objective of what we're trying to achieve with that expenditure. What is the brief we're going to give these external or anybody else investigators? It's not clear from the documentation I've got what the exact proposal is. What's one paragraph? What are they supposed to do? What are you looking to establish?
Thank you, Councillor Perry. I have actually, I'm a step ahead of you on that. I've actually sent the interim CEO TOR, which he has got a copy of, and we will actually look at that again and then come back and narrow it down to make sure that it fits in with what we have discussed today. So there's
how can we agree an expenditure without knowing what you're trying to do?
It is almost the same as my original motion that came to the council on the 22nd of July, Councillor Perry. But it needs to be narrowed down if we were to keep the cost down. Identical, almost the TOR was based on the original motion. We will circulate that. We will circulate it to all committee members.
But how can we vote on something you're not quite clear what you want to do?
Like I said, it is the original motion, which is actually in page
35, Chair.
Page 35. There's nothing different. I mean, it's nothing heavier in there. Lots of words, that's about it. Sense of humour, would you? Surely.
Chairman, may I just make a comment? Through you, Chairman, just to remind the Scrutiny Committee before we go any further on this, that actually the committee has no budget for this, and it would require a supplementary estimate, which would need to go to full council. Now, obviously, full council doesn't meet again now until the 9th of December. But obviously, it could be done by delegating that to myself in consultation with Councillor Lewis. If the committee was so minded, that would be a way round it. But you'd have to presumably set some parameters that it could be not to exceed 40,000 or something like that.
That's exactly what I had in mind. Okay. Actually, to to do it through the exec and through a reserve or whatever it is you have. Councillor Bates.
Thank you. Yes, Chair, I did have my hand up, but I appreciate, as I said, I've had a few technical issues tonight. I just wanted to comment about a couple of things here, because I have to say I have a lot of sympathy with what Councillor Perry has just said. I'm still not clear in my mind what we're actually trying to achieve here. I just want to pick up one point though from Councillor Chapman first, because this idea that it was all about regeneration is a complete rewrite of history. I was there at the time. I have made this point before. It was about regeneration in part, but it was also about income generation. And I don't care which officer or which member says it, that was exactly what happened at the time. And the council put out press releases at that time making it clear, which I still have. And I'm very happy to give to whichever investigator wants to look at those in due course. But in terms of the specific investigation, I do need to flag up a few issues, I think, with this, because firstly, in terms of the group of 4 people that was referred to earlier, I don't know how they're going to be contacted, to be honest. None of them are now members or officers of the council. So I can't see that there's going to be any point or purpose in relation to them at all. They're under no obligation whatsoever to assist with this, and yet they were the ones who gave internal advice to that. So the investigation cannot in any way, shape or form look at anything in relation to that. Where I think there is a role to play for members, and I do still think it's for members rather than for an external organisation, is looking at the information that was given to members at the time of the meeting when they made the decision, and immediately before the meeting, and how that decision came about. Because ultimately that is the bit which I do agree with the chairman about, that should be looked at properly. Yes, there was a council decision that was made, so there's not a governance issue in terms of the legality of that decision. But I think there is issues regarding the information that was given to members, and also how did we get to that point in the first place. And so that's the bit I think is helpful. And a lot of that, I think you are right to say, is a desktop exercise. And I don't think, to be honest, that does need any external person. We've got the paperwork already. It's the paperwork that was available at that time, and that members made a decision based on it at that time. And we're talking about the committee report. We're talking about a workshop that took place immediately beforehand and the information that was available for that. And that is the information that was available. And what, if any, other discussions took place? Now, that to me doesn't need to involve any independent investigation, external investigation at all. That is information which we have ourselves. That I disagree. I think there are experts, including the chair, by the way, who does know their way around financial figures, does know their way around paperwork, and I think, frankly, that should be the starting point. I do agree that it should not be members who were involved in that decision at the time. There's a list of the members who voted on that, that in the council's records. If I'm happy to answer any questions in relation to my own position and why I voted as I did, which I have spoken about publicly on a number of occasions, if that is of any use. But that, to me, is the point of this, the political aspect of it, bluntly. Why did that decision get made? What information did members have at that time? I don't think there is any point whatsoever in looking at alleged behaviour of certain people who are not here, if there is any such allegation, which I'm not aware that there is actually, because that is going to go absolutely nowhere and be a complete waste of public money, which I think should be spent on poverty and climate change and important issues like that. So that's kind of my position. And I just want to, final point is, I am not aware of any issue regarding hospitality. There is a hospitality register that has always been there. I appreciate there were some issues regarding how it was kept, but there is still a register, and there has always been a register regarding senior officers' hospitality and members' hospitality. And I have never heard any issue regarding that in regard to this matter. But again, I'm happy for that to be internally checked by our monitoring officer, who was never involved. Our current monitoring officer was never involved in this at the time.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bates. I mean, just to sort of add something to what you said, what you suggest is fine. Internally, we can look at all the documentation. It is the I think we are missing a point here, which is fundamentally the valuation side. The valuation is actually done based on what we actually know, which is Montague Evans's documentation. And we have external organizations giving us different figures. So we need to confirm whether those external numbers and the Montague Evans numbers, are they comparable? I mean, that's what when I did the presentation to all the group leaders, I did stress this, because this is what the external guys are saying. This is what the Montague Evans team is saying. And the difference is vast. So I'm not going to spell the numbers out because we are in a part, it's still being broadcast. So we need to actually confirm that this is correct. If it's wrong, it's wrong. But at least it's done, dusted. We know the valuation is right. The documentation, I agree with you. There are questions yet to be answered. That we can do it internally. Absolutely no problem as far as I'm concerned, because I only initiated this whole process. Because internally we can work that out. Martin Horn, who is new to the council, can easily carry this function out, and it should not technically take officers that much more time than what they would normally spend, maybe a few days, couple of days or a week extra. Sorry, Councillor McLaughlin, did you want to say? Sorry, Councillor Bates, you want to come back?
Yeah, just quickly. If you're saying to me that the only thing that is needing to be looked at externally is regarding the yield, then I would have a little bit more sympathy about that. We wouldn't then need £40,000. But if it needed something specific in relation to that, I would be open to that. And I say I'm not going to vote against anyway, because I was one of the members at the time, and I don't think I should vote on something where I had a vote at that particular meeting anyway. But I do think you should at least first meet with Montague Evans as councillors to hear their reasoning for that at the time, before you then anyone makes assumptions about whether that information was correct, wrong, or whatever. And I think that should be done first. If you are dissatisfied with that and you think there's issues with that, then by all means go and then get a second opinion if you like. But that would be the approach I would take. But I'm not going to vote on it because I did vote on the matter at the time, and obviously you are considering an investigation.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bates. Councillor McLaughlin, then I'd like to come back to Councillor Bates on a point.
Sure. Yeah, it was just that the Councillor Garrett proposed and Councillor Wheeler seconded a motion to end the committee is, as far as I can see, now that it's a maximum budget of 40, it doesn't have to be all spent. There's as little of it as possible, I think, from public funds, but it looks like you have a proposal and a seconder to have the working group as is proposed, and you've got a budget which I think it was suggested would be delegated authority to spend, which is quite right, and it could get you to exactly where I think you're trying to take the committee.
Thank you very much, Councillor McLaughlin. I think we've spent too much time going in circles now. It's time for us to make a decision which way we want to go, unless, of course, anything new that someone wants to say before we take a vote on this matter. The committee members, there's a proposal from Councillor Garrett to actually spend up to £40,000 on an external value or in person to look at the valuation, and that we work with the officer led by Section 151 officer to look at all other matters internally. And Councillor Victoria has actually seconded that motion proposal. Anyone, can I have the people who are going to support that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Against? Abstention? Am I right, Mr. Bates? Oh, you're abstaining. He's gone. No, he's still here.
No, Chair, I don't think I'll vote on that at all, because as I said, I was one of those who voted on the matter at the time, and I think it's for the committee to decide on the report.
Thank you very much. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. So we will not go to part two. We don't have to go to part two now, because this has been thrashed enough. And I'm sure everyone's interested in going and having a scotch and going to bed more than like me. So I would not spend time reading the exclusion public and press job anymore. Having said this, now we are into the last item, which is work program. Members, have you all read the work program? Are you all happy? Do you want to add anything? Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chairman, but if I may through you, obviously in light of the conversation on the last item, whether it would be something to put into the 25th of November meeting to report back.
Oh, it would be a good idea because it's got to go back to the full council because they referred it
that will go to council on the 9th of December, so it will give you an opportunity to November to consider.
Very good idea.
Thank you.
And if I can coordinate with you on the entire process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
We'll work together on this. Yeah. Thank you. And also you do need members for your committee, don't you?
Yes, Chairman, and that would be a matter for you to discuss with other members. It doesn't need to be agreed tonight, but obviously.
I will send out an email to all the committee members, all the councillors who would be interested in being part of this committee, which task and finish group committee. Yeah. Thank you. Right. Anything else to be added on to the work program? Councillor McLafferty.
Sorry, Chair, just for my clarification, the working group, is it members of the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee only, or is it open to other members?
I would open it up to the others, Councillor McLafferty. It's a sensible way to do it rather than keep it within the family.
Chairman, if I may, and sorry to interrupt again. So guidance on these task and finish groups is they should be loosely proportional, but they don't have to be because they don't actually have a decision-making power. They are only going to recommend back to this scrutiny committee, which in turn can only then recommend to council. So there's an idea that it ought to be politically balanced, but it doesn't absolutely need to be. It's just those people that are particularly interested in this matter and have something to bring to the party would be helpful.
Which could be interesting to find out. So let's try and see how I will speak to the group leaders. So that's the best way to do that. And then if the group leaders can recommend people from within your group as to whom you would like to participate in this group, that'll be great. So that way that shortens the process and we can get moving. I'm sure we want to move the council forward. So this is very important. We get this out of the way. Thank you very much for everything. Anything else to be added? Onto the work group? No, Mr. Pesci?
Got a hand in the air.
Councillor Wheeler, sorry.
That's okay. Just the review of exempt items.
That's in item 9.
If that could come back.
Oh, right.
In whatever format it needs to come back in. But just the review of the items that are exempt, in particular in relation to this from the 2016 council meeting, which still isn't up on our websites.
Chairman, that's covered in the review of exempt items is covered in agenda item 9, which is your next item after you've considered work program.
Consider whether any exempt items and annexes should be made public. Do we?
Normally, that's where I would make that recommendation. So, Chairman, I'd recommend that the exempt items in Annex B and C in agenda item 7 remain exempt for the time being. But what I would add that we will look at those exempt items, and as soon as we can make them public, we will do at the earliest possible moment. Yeah.
Hopefully before the next meeting, I have to assume.
Absolutely. Well, that'll be part of the work that we'll be doing, Chairman.
Hopefully before the next meeting, we'll make sure it's released. Yeah. Thank you very much. Councillor Wheeler and Councillor Bates.
Sorry, yeah, it was actually to come back on the point that was raised earlier during this debate about the exempt items that related to the committee meeting in 2016. the full council extraordinary committee meeting in 2016, which from memory, I think it was the 24th of August, I think that's the one that discussed the purchase of the MAL, and those minutes are still not available on our website, and therefore I assume are still exempt. So it's the best way forward to ensure that they are no longer exempt, and actually people, given that as part of the process of the review of the purchase is going to be a review of the articles that were presented. I just, and as I said, I'm not sure if this is the right committee for that to be discussed in, but it concerns me that those matters from that time are still exempt and not available to the public. And I think that would also clear up a number of conflicting points that have been made this evening.
Thank you very much. It's a valid point. Thank you very much. I personally think it should, those 24th of August 2016 minutes and the agenda should be made public. I see no reason why it should be kept away from the public now. It's available because that carries some weight.
Is that in Appendix B?
No, these are the minutes.
Separate
2016.
council meeting.
Very old council meeting.
It would be for the council to review it.
Yeah. Chairman, that will be for the council to review that. This is not the minutes from this particular committee. It's for the council.
For the main council. Yeah. So that's in December.
So could I ask in that case, please, if you, sorry to interrupt, is that if the Performance and Finance Committee could take a recommendation to the Executive and or full council as a result of the discussion that's gone in this evening, and in order for clarity and assurance to residents that those minutes are no longer exempt. So I think that we can make that request from Performance and Finance.
Yes,
I'm hoping, yeah. So
I would recommend, in fact, I would recommend it. Thank you.
So I don't know if we have to vote on it or what the situation is, but certainly if we could make that recommendation, if everyone's in agreement.
I'm going to refer to my expert on constitutional matters, Councillor Bates.
Thank you. Glad something I know something about. This is not a matter for full council. This is something which should be looked at by the monitoring officer. I'm not sure if he's still on the line or not. We should be looking at this for every council committee, not just the one in 2016. When a matter is dealt with as exempt, it's kept quiet. It's confidential for a time, but then I'm not clear we do then review or how often we review that matter, and it should then be made public at the earliest opportunity afterwards. It isn't then voted on again by full council. So that is, I would suggest, a matter for the monitoring officer to look at outside the meeting, and that we look to publish every exempt item in every committee that no longer needs to be kept exempt. And that we, if there is an issue with that, we'll deal with that by the governance working group, which the chairman and I and the leader of the council are obviously members of. But that is something which I fundamentally agree with and that we should be doing as a matter of course.
Thank you for the input there, Councillor Bates. I agree with you. I was confused as to why it should go to full council. Since I'm not a constitutional expert, I have to rely on Councillor Bates to always put most of us right. So there you go. He's got us right. And I would work with, from a performance and scrutiny committee point of view, I would work with the monitoring officer and the section 151 or the paid, all three paid officers to ensure that any exempt minutes are released as soon as possible. If we can make a note of that, yeah.
If I could just quickly come in, it's probably more a matter for our information governance team, but I would obviously work with them, so we do it together.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Sorry, from Mr. Rabathal. Right. Now we are on to exempt. We have reviewed the exempt items. It's done. Date of next meeting is the 25th of November 2020 at 7 p.m. I look forward to it. Please make a note of it and please come back. It'll be another riveting an exciting meeting like we have had today. And thank you very much for attending, and good night.